Actions around the country on the announcement that Joe Biden is president-elect, the 46th of the United States. And what happened was that the CNN was the first television network to project that Joseph R. Biden Jr., as they call him, will become America's next president. And shortly after that, other networks, including NBC, ABC, and CBS, and including Fox News, they also called it shortly after the projection. The reason they did that is because with the latest tallies of the vote, Pennsylvania has given Joe Biden there's 20 electoral votes, and that's on the basis of the votes that have come in. Remember, there was that 0.5% threshold that everybody was looking at for a recount, but Pennsylvania has given Joe Biden 34,414 votes, and that means it's outside of that threshold of a recount. Just looking at where most of those votes came from, they came from Northampton County in Pennsylvania, that working class area that was once home to Bethlehem Steel. Some saying living up to his reputation as a bellwether, Biden appears to have flipped the county blue. So those are the results, and of course that means there are results that are still outstanding in other strategic states. We'll look at them in just a moment. I'll try and call up what we have at the moment. Nevada, from the results that I last saw, that still had 94% of the votes counted, with Biden leading by 2 percentage points in Georgia. He's only 0.1% in the lead. A lot of people looking at Atlanta at this point. Remember, there was a press briefing earlier on in the week about Atlanta, the possibility of a recount, or forcing that by litigation earlier on. That was said to be a possibility. Georgia has 16 electoral votes to offer. North Carolina, Trump is in the lead with 1.4%, and it's got 15 electoral votes with 98% of the votes counted. Arizona, 11. Biden is in the lead with 0.6%. 97% of those votes counted. So what we're looking at the moment, according to the national tally, Biden has 279 votes, with Trump at 214 of those electoral votes. At Senate level, that puts the Democrats at 48 plus 1 seat, and the Republicans 48 minus 1 seat. And in the House in general, the Democrats, as we mentioned, at 215 seats, with the Republicans at 195. So Americans reacting at the moment, the American flag being hoisted high after what's been said to be pretty much echoing the theme of Biden, his sentiments over his campaign, saying that Americans must unite. That with the campaign over, he said earlier on, it's time to put the anger and the harsh rhetoric behind us and come together as a nation. And you would wonder if this is what those who are out there are celebrating, that with all of the polarization of the party politics, Americans are now beginning to see an opportunity to come together and deal with what is most worrying at the moment. You'd forget that the coronavirus is still very much an issue in the United States. In fact, it was said that this week alone, record numbers coronavirus deaths were announced. So still very much an issue that the nation has to deal with. It's had various ramifications on the economy, which is what analysts have been saying has been worrying some of the people who, when they're voting, they were keeping that in mind. And that puts a lot of pressure on Joe Biden to attend to that issue. We'll continue analysis with our resident analyst later on, and of course speaking to our correspondents in the various parts of America. Celebrations in the U.S. as you can see the announcement being made by various news agencies that Joe Biden is the president-elect of the United States. Pennsylvania bringing him that victory, it would seem. And we have tweets that are coming in to react to the news. We've been asking you about your perceptions of this vote. Do you believe it free and fair? Well, the results are announced. At least projections, they're obviously not the final tally, but this is how the news agencies in the US are calling it. And as you saw, Americans celebrating in line with that. Let's see what your tweets are saying with regards to these developments. Let's bring them up and hear what South Africans think about what's happening in the US. Arlene, you're saying, hey, at Real Donald Trump, guess what? You hashtag fired in my hometown. Signed the pink slip. And it's very interesting, this tweet by Arlene. It comes from the Drudge Report. The Drudge Report is a conservative website, and they actually put up that headline, hey, you're fired. So that's been some interesting developments. Part of the news networks that have called this election includes Fox News. So as you know, Fox has been said to be very partisan when it comes to the president. James Januzzi is saying, for decency, for science, for inclusion, for collaboration, for good, a nation divided cannot stand. The time to work together is now. Let us never make such a terrible mistake again. America can truly be great again. Donald Trump, hashtag you're fired. So it seems to be one of those that's trending at the moment. Jason Diller saying you should consider this now that you have the time. It seems you're a bit weak with math, leadership and strategy. You can probably even complete it while you're in prison. Talking about quite a few of the statements made by Donald Trump, saying he won't concede. Peter Morley, for the first time in 4 years, I can breathe again. Hashtag you're fired. And that statement very poignant, of course, referring to George Floyd, which has become one of the rallying cries for this particular election, the issue of race being brought to the fore, greater access for votes of not only minorities, but to transcend some of these historical ills that plague the United States. Maya Irvin saying, things I learned from reading comments from Trump supporters, they still don't believe COVID-19 is real, and they think that many states in the US aren't part of the country and as such are going to flee from Biden there, like Alaska or New Jersey. Hashtag Trump meltdown, hashtag you're fired. Speaking about Alaska, it's one of those that delivered an overwhelming number of votes for Donald Trump. I think Alaska, Arkansas, I must remember the other state with the A that delivered majority votes for Donald Trump. And this is all because it's being perceived that there's a shift in United States politics. As we mentioned, Northampton County turning the tide in Joe Biden's favor. Hillary Clinton's tweet coming in saying the voters have spoken and they have chosen Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to be our next president and vice president. It's history-making ticket, a repudiation of Trump and a new page for America. Thank you to everyone who helped make this happen. Onward together. And Kamala Harris, senator from California and former presidential candidate herself, you remember she ran against Joe Biden, making history as elected as the first vice president of the United States. You remember, it is a milestone, particularly because she not only grappled with a long history of racial injustice, but during her campaign, she faced both racist and sexist attacks from the conservatives, including President Trump himself, who have refused to also pronounce her name correctly. This is what these people are probably celebrating. I mean, I can only venture a guess, but the minute that vote was called in, when CNN announced that Joe Biden Jr. will become America's next president-elect, you saw there's people gathering on the streets. After 4 long, tense days, Americans have been watching this very closely. It's a historic moment in the sense that this election, one of the tightest run elections, but it's a historic moment for those who believe that it's a change for good, that it's a change against what some have accused as anarchy by the presidency of Donald Trump, and some are saying that really they should have projected the winner a long time ago. So we will get more reaction in just a moment. In fact, let's bring in our foreign editor, Sophie Mukwena, right now. Sophie, you are seeing these visuals, and obviously we are going to go throughout the United States, and we can, you know, profile the voters themselves. But I think it speaks to what a lot of Americans are thinking at this point.
Yes, indeed. Americans are very excited, those who voted for Joe Biden. You know that the country is divided in the middle. And those who supported Joe Biden, people who wanted a different United States of America, are currently celebrating in states such as Washington, New York, and where Donald Trump didn't get the numbers that he thought he would get. And what I can say is that this is a moment where Joe Biden will have to ensure that he unites all the Americans.
So let's talk about that unity in itself. Do you think that that will be difficult? Many people are pointing to the fact that it's been such a tight race that it means that Donald Trump still had strength and influence and support.
It is a very tight race, but clearly the Americans this time around felt that Donald Trump was not the type of leader the country deserves. United States of America has modeled itself as a mature and very strong democracy, a leader in the world. And therefore, they had lost all those important positions, particularly at the international stage. And therefore, I think this is a moment for them to relook at their influence internationally. But in the country itself, there was a serious problem. This is a verdict. In fact, this is a red card to racists. This is a red card to any leader in future in the United States of America who is going to use the office of the United States of America, the presidency, to kind of bring her family, her children, and her friends around that office to run that office, because that was the problem. Donald Trump had his son-in-law, his daughter running the White House. And therefore, for Americans who are watching, this was an insult. Then you have the minority groups who felt that they were not being recognized by Donald Trump. When there were those complaints, the Black Lives Matter protests and all that, what did Donald Trump do? Instead of uniting the nation, but also ensuring that he gives assurance to the minority that they are also important in that country, he chose to side with the right-wing groups, and he refused to rebuke the right-wing in public. And therefore, this is a verdict to racism, this is a verdict to abuse of power, nepotism, which leads to corruption in most cases. If you look at countries such as Angola right now, where the children of the former president are now facing criminal charges because this is what Dos Santos did with power when he was head of state, and Donald Trump was gravitating towards that. And secondly, you have also people from the other side who support Donald Trump, who were very happy about white supremacy and the influence. They felt they were able to reclaim their country. And that is why you had this racial tension in the United States of America. At the international level, you had a very serious problem where the United States of America didn't support multilateralism. He was pulling the United States of America away from multilateralism. Not only that, even the friends of the United States of America, such as NATO, such as the G7 countries, the relations were very frosty. You look at the relations with the European Union, it was not the normal relationship we knew or we are used to. But it was a clear, inward-looking policy. America says there's nothing wrong in prioritizing your own citizens. But unfortunately, we live in a global village. As you do that, you must also participate at the multilateral level. Okay. You cannot isolate your nation or your country from the rest of the world. And therefore, it was a problem. And the issue of COVID-19, he was in denial. And because he was fighting with China at the trade level, at the WTO level, he used the virus of COVID-19 as a weapon to fight China. And people were dying. And look, you look at the numbers yesterday, shocking, 120,000 people a day. You know? It is very, very bad. And therefore, it was Americans saying, Donald Trump, you've messed up, and other Americans saying, we are happy with Donald Trump.
That's SABC foreign editor Sophie Mkwena. As you can see, visuals of Americans in various parts of the United States out on the streets celebrating what has been projected as a victory for Joe Biden. He has been pronounced as the president-elect of the United States. The 46th, we are now back to our colleague Sherwin Bryce Pease, who is in New York. So Sherwin, I'm just looking at the results in Nevada. I believe those are in that Joe Biden has gotten those 6 electoral votes.
Yep, we just got that confirmation as well, Tsepiso, Nevada finally, because, similar to Pennsylvania, we had seen a trajectory there. The president was able to double his lead in Nevada yesterday. The president-elect, was able to double his lead in Nevada. And critical, those 6 states, if the Arizona affirmation that AP and Fox News had given him much earlier in this race was confirmed by the others, he would have only just needed the 6 electoral college votes from Nevada, but first getting the 20 in Pennsylvania and now Nevada. So really just solidifying his lead here in terms of the Electoral College, really sort of shutting the door quite firmly so on any hopes that the president could make a late comeback here. Becomes the oldest individual to be elected president of the United States. And also, of course, the historic nature of his vice president, becoming the first black female person to be elected vice president of the United States. So certainly a historic day and really evidence, the minute NBC News called this first, outside the windows here in New York City, you heard the celebrations immediately. There are people, thousands have gathered at Washington Square Park in the city. We hope to go out there later and interact with some of them. But really a sense of joy. You see this displayed on the streets of Washington, D.C. as well. Philadelphia, I've seen images from Philadelphia where people, these are democratic cities. Let's not forget that. But celebration certainly on the streets here. A sense of relief as well, having tension built up over the last number of weeks. There was talk about post-election violence. Windows were being boarded up in New York City and Manhattan. It looked very strange to see these scenes in the United States, given that this is one of the oldest democracies anywhere in the world. And really just a repudiation, as Sophie was saying, despite the president having a great deal of support, Biden just had more support, Tsepiso, and that was telling at the end of the day.
And I want to talk about that support show and some interesting sites that we're seeing developments, including publications that were considered to be conservative, to be behind Donald Trump as president. I'm looking at something here on Fox News. Apparently, Brett Baier referred to Joe Biden, obviously, as president-elect, and apparently Chris Wallace laughed and said that's going to take some getting used to. So is the tide turning against the president from his traditional supporters, even though he had said to some people, if you want to have some influence in the next election, you better stand behind me?
The levees have broken. Even Rudy Giuliani, who was speaking at a press conference with his lawyers, remember there's all sorts of litigation that they're still pursuing. And even Rudy Giuliani said that he expected the president to concede. And this is kind of his attack dog, one of his top surrogates who is conceding this. And so I think in terms, you're going to see slowly but surely Republicans begin to chip away. There is a statement from the White House, from the campaign, a statement from President Donald Trump. I'll read you just a bit of that. We all know know why Joe Biden is rushing to falsely pose as the winner and why his media allies, not sure who he's referring to, are trying so hard to help him. They don't want the truth to be exposed. The simple fact is this election is far from over. Joe Biden has not been certified as the winner of any of the states, let alone any of the highly contested states headed for mandatory recounts or states where our campaign has valid and legitimate legal challenges that could determine the ultimate victor. Just doesn't feel like America when you see a losing party issue statements like this. Joe Biden tweeted this. So, let's give you the other side, Sipi. So, America, I'm honored that you have chosen me to lead our great country. The work ahead of us will be hard, but I promise you this. I will be a president for all Americans, whether you voted for me or not. I will keep the faith that you have placed in me. So just, the disposition from either camp here, the lack of magnanimity from the Trump campaign, not wholly surprising that Trump would react this way, just given his statement and the aspersions he was casting on the election process. But what has stood firm are the people that have been counting those ballots in these secure locations, following the letter of the law, following the rules of engagement, and just carrying on with their work despite the noise that was hovering above them, to piece of the political narrative that the president was trying to inject into this, sacrosanct process that is so fundamental to democracies anywhere in the world, trying to undermine that process. They continued with their work, and the mathematicians in the various news agencies quietly watching to see when exactly they could call this race, particularly in Pennsylvania, where they felt comfortable doing that, and NBC leading the way, and now you're seeing the levees of breaking. Nevada, we're still waiting for Arizona to be confirmed. Of course, Georgia, where the president-elect has now taken a lead that seems to be unassailable to pieces. So, yeah, the universe is aligned for Joe Biden finally.
So, Sharon, stay with us. We've got Dr. Krista Johnson, Associate Professor and Director of the Center for African Studies at Howard University in Washington, D.C. She's a political scientist whose work has focused largely on African politics and health politics in Africa and the diaspora. She joins us via Skype for reaction. And I just want to follow up on what Sharon said there, what Nancy Pelosi said about Joe Biden, that he is... he is elected winner because of his being a unifier, his values in faith, family and community, who work tirelessly to heal our nation. Do you think the people in Northampton were thinking exactly that, the ones who tipped over the Pennsylvania vote in favor of Joe Biden? Is this what happened?
I think that's precisely what happened. It's really is a remarkable day. The American people have spoken, and that was clear from the beginning. Our democracy and democracies. The people decide who the next president is going to be, and they've clearly decided here. The elections and the vote count in Pennsylvania has been really quite interesting. Certainly we give a lot of credit and need to give a lot of credit to Philadelphia, to the metropolitan areas, to the black vote, which certainly increased there. But what was interesting really about Biden's win in Pennsylvania is that he increased his and really chipped away at Trump's majority in a number of even the red counties in Pennsylvania. So really, I think the messaging of unity, the messaging of decency and restoring the soul of the nation was resonating not simply in the urban areas and the suburban metropolitan areas, but also with some rural voters who really just understood that the country was going in the wrong direction and we wanted to see a different kind of leadership in Washington.
Do you think a majority in the U.S. Senate is going to further solidify his mandate, make it easier for him to enjoy support? He's inheriting a presidency unlike what Clinton did, unlike what Obama did. This is a presidency, a nation at crisis. I mean, just looking, I want to look at the coronavirus figures that came in today. The death toll still keeps going up, and the U.S. are still obviously at the top of the list. Confirmed today over 10,080,285 cases at the moment as we speak.
Yes, so I think control of the Senate is going to be critical. A number of commentators suggest that perhaps if the Republicans retain control of the Senate and then we have basically a split Congress, perhaps that might be better for unity of the country because it will force Biden to work across the aisle. I think he would do that in any case. I mean, Biden is a moderate. He is not, on the left of the Democratic Party and has never, espoused himself to be. So I think the problem that we have with the split Congress is that the Republican Party has seen a trend really over the past 20 plus years, of their base dwindling. They have not won the popular vote really in the last 20 years, going back to the Bush administration. So what that means really is that I think that they're in a bit of a, it's kind of like a cornered dog. And I think that what you're going to see from Mitch McConnell is not the possibility of compromise. They will compromise on things where I think that there's common consensus. But I don't think that you're going to necessarily see Mitch McConnell, who somehow now is any more or any less obstructive to Biden's agenda. I'm hopeful that I think we'll look, obviously, the next few weeks will be critical because Biden is going to signal to the world and to the country what are going to be his priorities in terms of who he meets with. We anticipate, of course, he's going to be calling Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. He'll be calling, of course, heads of states, foreign heads of states. And who he really is speaking with in these next couple of weeks is going to be critical in terms of giving us a sense of how he is going to govern and what issues are going to rise to the top. As you mentioned, coronavirus and, of course, our handling of the coronavirus is certainly going to be top of that list. And surely there must be some opportunities there for reaching across the aisle and coming to some consensus in terms of, new legislation which is going to address that.
We'll come to the issue of Africa and the rest of the world, how this could impact on multilateralism. But I want to just quickly talk to you, Dr. Johnson, about what we anticipate will happen within the Senate. You mentioned Mitch McConnell. He was talking about the legality of this election, how this is how, Americans operate. Do you think Donald Trump's political trajectories are changing with this? Because there has been some dissonance within the party about how he's handled this.
There has been, but it's really quite remarkable. The data shows that President-elect Biden has won the largest number of votes of any presidential candidate in the United States in U.S. history. But the second presidential candidate is President Trump, has won the second largest number of votes. So he managed to mobilize and to get out the Republican vote more so than any other candidate. That is going to ensure that he has still a lot of clout and a lot of power within the Republican Party. And a lot of those senators who are returning to the Senate come January have Donald Trump to thank for that. So it's going to be a really interesting, I think, tightrope that's and so you're seeing the Republican Party in some ways split along those lines. Mitch McConnell in some ways has a lot more leeway to, kind of resist I think what some of the agenda of Donald Trump, but others like Lindsey Graham and others who really had close races, and the only reason why they won is because Donald Trump was able to get out more of the Republican vote.
Let me bring my colleague Sharon on this. Sharon, you obviously have been on the ground in the past couple of days, beating the pavements. What do you think Americans are saying about Donald Trump? Does he have any future? And also talk to us about what is then likely to happen at the United Nations, because you're also stationed there. If there's now going to be a change of tone, of posturing with a Democratic Party administration?
Well, there'll certainly be no change of tone from Donald Trump. I mean, that really is, history shows us that he doesn't really walk back his comments. I mean, the fact that the lack of a concession speech or anything conciliatory in the moments that, this historic moment has happened in the United States, the first black female vice president-elect, the oldest president-elect in the history of this country. Don't expect a different tone from Donald Trump. And as Professor Johnson there has indicated, he is very popular within the Republican Party and will have sway in terms of what happens with that party. In fact, they don't call it the Republican Party anymore. They call it the party of Donald Trump. And, we heard some threatening words from his son, Donald Trump Jr., earlier this week, calling on Republicans, especially those that might run for office, for the highest office in 2024, to come out and support their father, just as he was making claims, these erroneous claims about fraud, unsubstantiated claims of vote rigging across various states in this country. Don Jr. coming out and making this really harsh statement about, you better get out there and defend him, because don't forget, if you want to run in 2024. So the threatening tone that we've heard from this family, in addition to the fact that we don't know what happens legally now, that the president, the incumbent will no longer have this guardrail that is the U.S. presidency from all the investigations that are still going on. You'll remember that Michael Cohen, his lawyer, his personal lawyer for many, many years within the Trump organization, is working with the district attorney Cyrus Vance in Manhattan here in terms of pursuing his tax returns, which have still not been revealed to the American public, out of the norm of which people running for the highest office here have done. Joe Biden, I believe, has released 10 years of his tax returns. Donald Trump, to this day, even seeking re-election, has not done so. So what do those tax returns reveal about us? There are various rape cases that the president will have to answer to now that he does not have this veneer of the presidency that prevents the pursuit of criminal cases against him. So there are various permutations at which we can look at Donald Trump's popularity within the Republican Party, but also on a personal level, Tsepiso, what will he face in terms of the long arm of the law that continues to pursue him? And of course, the investigations that you would now see from, a different kind of setup in terms of government. Of course, Republicans for now still control the Senate, but there are two key swing races in the state of Georgia that are going to a runoff that will decide who controls the Senate in early January next year. So if Democrats are able to wrestle those two seats and have a slim majority, they'll be able to certainly put a great deal more pressure in terms of investigating what they believe to be malfeasance in terms of the Trump administration, not just in the White House, but in areas of the Justice Department, the the Health Department, HHS, in terms of the handling of this coronavirus. So a lot of unknowns here, as the only thing we finally do know is that.
Would those unknowns, though, extend to the hallways of the United Nations? Obviously, we know there's been historically contesting agendas, especially with the veto-carrying members, the United States being very firmly of that. Would a democratic administration change the direction of America's foreign policy?
Very much so, very much. And I think there are two key examples that I can point to. In fact, there are many more. But if you look at one of the last votes of the Obama administration in the UN Security Council, it's when they abstained on a resolution condemning Israel's continued illegal settlement activity in parts of the West Bank. The Obama administration, that was the first time a U.S. administration had abstained on a vote involving the state of Israel in the Security Council. And so that resolution, therefore, becomes international law in terms of the international community saying, stop these settlements, they're illegal, we don't like what you're doing on the ground there. Also, he abstained, the Obama administration, on a vote in the General Assembly, the annual vote that condemns and seeks to remove the economic embargo on Cuba. And of course, we've seen a reversal on that period of détente under the Obama administration, the reestablishing of diplomatic ties between the United States and Cuba, all that eroded under a Trump administration. So there are clear examples of how the administration of Barack Obama, and we expect in many ways the continuation now under his vice president, now as president-elect Biden, for a continuation of those policies, certainly in the multilateral fora. We would not have seen the withdrawal from the World Health Organization. We would not have seen the kinds of tensions we are currently experiencing in the World Trade Organization. The Paris Climate Change Agreement, which was so key to Barack Obama's foreign policy. Joe Biden very involved in those negotiations as well, and has said that they will rejoin the Paris Climate Change Agreement after the withdrawal of President Trump. And at the last one, the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, a pivotal portion of Obama's political capital on the international front, the President of the United States withdrawing from that, Tsepiso.
Dr. Johnson, how do you see U.S. internationalism changing under a Biden presidency, and would it also extend to foreign interest spending?
Well, I think that Sherwin is right. Vice President-elect Biden, or President-elect, I guess now Biden, is he's going to, I think, return very much to, kind of the Democratic playbook in the Obama administration. So I wouldn't imagine saying something terribly radical, but his priority will be to be restoring really the American, Euro, NATO alliance and allies, and bringing us back into the fold in terms of building and establishing the international rules on climate change, the Iran nuclear deal, those kinds of issues. So I don't think you're going to see anything radical, but really kind of a return to what was previously the norm. In other areas on the African continent, it'll be interesting, actually. I mean, by and large, most Africans don't really have very much positive or perhaps negative, maybe more negative to say about the Obama administration's Africa policy. And it'll be interesting. I think you'll see something different in the Biden administration there, and perhaps something that will be more in line with, I think, what a majority of Africans are looking for. Yes, I mean, his multilateralism, I think, is going to, bode well for the African continent. He also has a number of people around him who have strong interests in the in Africa and in African policy. People like Congresswoman Karen Bass, Ambassador Susan Rice, others who are advising him on Africa policy, who have long histories of engagement with the African continent. So I don't think I would anticipate that you're not going to see a continuation of the bilateral trade agreements that under the Trump administration. But I think something that's going to be more in line with, I guess, supporting the continental African free trade agreements and seeing if we can work collectively and multilaterally with, I guess, regions of the African continent.
How swift would that change be? I'd imagine he gets into the White House in January. There is the impending issue of the WTO Director General, which obviously is of huge interest to Africa. There's the issue of the World Health Organization and the stance that the U.S. has taken under President Donald Trump. Our former finance minister was saying that under Biden, we'd at least have a better chances and resources of surviving the coronavirus. So I think these are things that are very imminent and obviously of urgency.
Yes, and I think that you're going to see him act on those swiftly, because I don't think that I don't think those are controversial issues to the American people. So I think you're going to see him re-enter a number of these agreements that the Trump administration pulled us out of. I think you're going to see a shift in policy with regards to the leadership of the WTO and also us rejoining the WHO. There's a clear difference between Trump's response to coronavirus and President-elect Biden. He understands that pandemic preparedness needs to happen on a global scale, and understanding that, if we allow coronavirus to run ravage on the African continent, it's bound to make its way over here, like other epidemics as well.
So let's not forget what we're talking about here. You're seeing there in the background visuals of Americans' reaction to the announcement that Joe Biden is president-elect, the 46th. My colleague Sherwin Bryce P is still with us. And Sherwin, just sticking with that coronavirus, do you think now, and I know behavioral change is something that's not necessarily immediate, but are we going to start seeing a change in people who are not only ambivalent, but who were disbelieving of the impact of the coronavirus simply because the candidate that they supported was of that opinion?
Yeah, and of course, Donald Trump isn't necessarily just going to go away. Biden has talked about, sort of a federal mandate on the wearing of masks. But because of federalism in the United States, so power devolves to the states here. So it depends really on what happens on the ground in those states. We talk about the Democratic leaning states and the Republican leaning states. That's going to be a big challenge. You can use the powers of persuasion and the powers, but not necessarily the powers of your office, because there aren't many as a president. So it's really really going to be those conversations at the local level. I mean, Biden has talked about his ability to empathize, his ability to reach across the aisle. That's his history. He's over 4 decades of politicking in Washington as a congressman, then as a senator, and then a vice president. So he understands how this works. The problem is that the Republican Party has changed. The Republican Party of old is no longer the consensus-seeking party. It's our way or the highway, and that is the problem that Biden faces here. So when you talk about a national mask mandate, it's great on paper, but it doesn't really mean every state in this country is going to follow that directive, because people are so torn apart in this country by the divisiveness that has resonated and really come to define the United States. Just look at the numbers in the popular vote. It's very, very close. I mean, there's 4 million split, but Donald Trump is the second most, the president to receive the second most votes in a presidential election, only superseded this year by Joe Biden, who has that record. So this is a very divided country. How we move forward on coronavirus, how we bring down the temperature and the numbers that we are seeing above 130,000 in the last 24 hours is really going to be a big challenge. But without Donald Trump dominating the airways and having the bully pulpit that the presidency affords him, that could help Biden in really dominating that message. And
Dr. Johnson, I'd like to hear from you. There's a view that what we're seeing here, you said, you made that Freudian slip, and I was about to say, well, he spent 40 decades, I think, trying to get into the White House. And some have said he is a picture of resilience. And Sherwin just speaking there about some of what he intends to achieve. But I'm wondering just how far America will move. There were expectations that Obama's legacy would have left the landscape change, but then we had George Floyd and the continuation of the hashtag Black Lives Matters campaign. So that means there are still very deeply ingrained important issues to talk about here. When we talk about social justice, when we talk about racial redress, when we talk about judicial reform, when we talk about economic reparations in some cases, but equality, access to opportunities. What help would he get, and from whom in those quarters? Do you think the polarizing politics of the past administration, there will be able to be healing, that people will be able to mend?
Well, I think he certainly is going to bring a different tone to the White House, right, and to Washington. And I think that's much needed. And tone matters, right? I feel like, and many Americans feel as though we are exhausted. This is what you're seeing is really a jubilation, but also just really a sigh of relief and just an expectation that we're not going to be on the roller coaster that we've been on for the past 4 years. So just, I think a change in tone is going to be very key for the Biden administration. But in addition to that, there are a number of policies that I think he's going to have to lead with off the bat, which aren't necessarily the flashy policies for the left of the Democratic Party, where he can build alliances across the board, and that will also help the majority of Americans. So the economy, many, of course, are very concerned with jobs and the economy. If he needs to come up with a robust jobs plan and economic plan, and also get coronavirus under control in 2021. Really kind of right off of the bat. And then once he does that, I think you're going to see kind of a softening of his opposition on the right. And then maybe you can start actually implementing some of the more progressive policies that he's interested in addressing.
And the reason I raised some of these issues, one of the tweets that we saw, this person was saying, I can finally breathe after 4 years. And that really speaks to the subjugation that quite a few people feel for different reasons, and irrespective of whether they're on the left or on the right. And I say this because if you look at some of the remaining states where there seems to be a hung vote, but simply because the count is slowing down because of the number and the volumes of the votes. But those issues that you mentioned, jobs, for instance, are very much high up there. And that's been part of the reason for the intolerance that we've seen in the United States.
Yes, that's right. And I think, the Trump under Clinton and the Democrats, the the language has generally been, especially for the rural areas and the manufacturing sectors where they have lost considerable amounts of jobs, is that we're going to really, I think, move the economy in a different direction, which is less dependent on oil, less dependent on, or more dependent on renewable energy sources and all of that. And that hasn't really resonated with a lot of people in the rural areas who want their coal mining jobs back and their auto industry jobs back and all of that. And so, but Trump has, I think, the Biden campaign has managed to eat in at least a little bit into even that constituency. And if we can develop an economic plans that actually will benefit those communities and will bring them along a bit, then I think you're going to see a continued erosion of this, the Trumpism and the kind of argument that we need to go back somehow to a better day, which just simply isn't a realistic plan anyway. I mean, Trump was not able to do that in the 4 years that he was in office, right? We don't have coal mining jobs or other industry jobs, yeah.
My colleague Kate Fisher joins us now. And Kate, just perhaps to follow through on that, one of the things that Joe Biden repeatedly said during his campaigning is that I'm an ordinary working class guy who doesn't have a chip on his shoulder about Wall Street. I don't care about Wall Street. I care about the ordinary person who needs a job, who needs to put food on the table. Do you think that this is a reflection of the votes that we see? It's been a tightly contested race, but it seems as these results are coming in, and quite a few of these states had been called as Biden leading.
Yeah, that's right. He certainly has. I mean, I think initially in the hours after the polls closed, Donald Trump looked to be doing better, perhaps, than some people had thought he would. A lot of that down to the fact that Republicans tend to vote on the day and in person, and those votes tend to be the ones that get counted first. And it's taken these several days for all the rest of the votes that arrived via the mail, which were saved to be counted afterwards, for Joe Biden's votes to come in. And it is shown that now millions upon millions of Americans have rejected Donald Trump's presidency and said that they want something different, something that Joe Biden can give to them. We should also note that millions and millions did still vote for Donald Trump, and he still has a huge number of supporters here in America. But the key thing is a majority have chosen Joe Biden, and it will be, yes, for that reason that he talks about being more of a man on the street, a man on Main Street, not Wall Street. He talks a lot about his working class roots in Scranton, a working class town in Pennsylvania. But it's also about the fact that he has promised a strategy for dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, which is still not under control here in the US.
So we'll talk about the coronavirus pandemic, Kate, but I'm just looking at the results by county with regards to Nevada, which has also given Biden about 6 electoral votes. Lincoln, for instance, giving him 87% of the votes, and you have Murrow also giving him 88%, White Pine. It's said that Nevada was won most importantly thanks to the labor unions. What are your thoughts on this, and what were the extenuating factors?
Absolutely. There are a lot of workers in Nevada who work in the hospitality industry. It's where Las Vegas is based, with all those enormous hotels, restaurants, casinos. A lot of the people that work there are immigrants, mainly of Hispanic heritage, but of all different countries over the world. And they have they are unionized because there are so many of them, and these hotels, etc., rely on them. Interestingly, Bernie Sanders, who ran against Joe Biden in the Democratic primary, he actually won Nevada in the primary contest when the Democrats were trying to choose who their candidate would be for the presidential election. And he did a lot of work within these communities about getting them registered to vote, getting them on side. He is more left-wing than Joe Biden, and more of a perhaps more his platform was more about workers' rights. So he worked very hard with them. And it seems that perhaps the groundwork that Bernie Sanders and his team did amongst those communities in Nevada has paid dividends now for Joe Biden in the presidential election. And they have turned out and voted for him.
Dr. Johnson, your thoughts on this?
Yes, I would completely agree with that. So there was a lot of speculation or a complaint that perhaps the Bernie Sanders folks in the 2016 presidential campaign were disappointed that they didn't win the nomination, and then therefore didn't turn out for Hillary Clinton in the presidential election in 2016. We're not seeing that this year at all. So Bernie Sanders campaigned very strongly for Joe Biden and really got out his vote, and the left of the party certainly came out. I would say also in terms of those western states of Nevada and Arizona as well, it's interesting also to note that the indigenous communities, so we have a number of indigenous tribal communities out there, and they came out to vote in much stronger numbers than they have historically as well for President-elect Biden.
And I just want to still remain with Nevada, Dr. Johnson. Donald Trump narrowly lost Nevada in 2016. He desperately tried to flip it, and he's obviously lost it again to Joe Biden. What do you think it is about the blue wall that has remained formidable here that could be translated into a national strategy? Kate was speaking about the coronavirus, for instance, that is something that has probably been appealing to voters, but it obviously wasn't to others. And I'm also looking at absentee votes. That means that there was a failure to speak directly to affected people.
Indeed. So really what you're seeing throughout the country, and a lot of analysts have commented on this, I know it might be confusing to people outside of the United States. They see a lot of red on our electoral map, but a state like Nevada is actually indicative of this. So you have a large state like Nevada where most of the counties probably went for Trump, but the population simply is not there. So the population is around Nevada. And what you're seeing in the country is really a trend towards the Democratic Party gaining more and more of a stronghold, not just in the metropolitan areas, but in the suburban areas around the major cities. And so you saw this in Nevada as well, that that's really where the Democrats have kind of racked up the electoral votes. And I think that it also has to do with other demographic shifts in terms of college educated, more middle class electorate that are going more in favor of Joe Biden as opposed to Donald Trump. In the more rural areas, which are less populated, then you're still seeing strong support for Donald Trump. But those are also, as you said, Nevada is one of the states which is reeling from spikes in the COVID pandemic, right? So COVID cases. So it'll be really very interesting as well to see how that tracks in terms of the areas which are seeing spikes in COVID pandemic and those that went for Trump.
So, Kate, what would you say to that? And I'll bring in my colleague, Sean Bryce-Pease, in just a moment. I'm just looking at the breakdown of the preliminary estimates of the votes themselves. The people who voted most for Biden are people who are between the ages of 45 to 64. And if you break it down by demographic, it would seem that most of the vote count would come from white voters. So the message that you were speaking about, that the Biden campaign would have had that appealed to voters on the coronavirus and management thereof, what is it that you think struck the right note?
I think absolutely. I think there are a lot of older Americans who are really scared about coronavirus, and they see people dying from it. They see their kids or grandkids not being able to go to school, or people in their families losing their jobs, and they are worried about it, and they see that this country has not got a handle on it yet. And Joe Biden, in the way, not just by what he's been saying, but in the way he's conducted his campaign, staying indoors, not holding large rallies, holding a lot of drive-in rallies, always wearing a mask. It's a stark difference to the way the president has dealt with it, even becoming infected himself. And I think, well, clearly a majority of older Americans have decided that they would rather put their trust in somebody who says he has an idea about a strategy about how to start curbing the pandemic here. Interestingly, I've lost count of what day it is now, but either yesterday or the day before, Joe Biden, in the middle of all this uncertainty about the election result, actually kept with his coronavirus briefing. He has been briefed as much as the president about this, as many as the presidential candidates still do, so that they are beginning to get ready to take on the job should they win. So he attended a coronavirus briefing during all this chaos, which just shows how seriously he is taking this issue, and it is clearly really important to that demographic.
Showan Bryce P is back with us. Showan, so as we can see, excitements on the streets of the United States. So we'll be showing various states. And tell me, we spoke about Kamala Harris earlier on, the fact that she also will be making history. How much of that excitement is around her, and how heavy is the expectation? As they say, heavy is the head that wears the crown. And I'm sure with the issues that she stood for, issues that she's been criticized on, there's a lot of pressure being brought to bear on her as well.
Well, what's really going to be interesting is to hear from the president-elect and the vice president-elect when they speak tonight. We've just got confirmation that that would be around 8 p.m. local time. Remember, it's Episo. They were due to speak last night. The expectation was that we would have had Pennsylvania's results yesterday, but that, of course, was deferred to today. So we're told that they will speak tonight at 8 p.m. local time, which is 3 a.m. South African time. Not sure how many people will be awake for that. But yes, absolutely, the historic nature of this candidacy. You remember the euphoria that surrounded Barack Obama's election in 2008. I think you're going to see similar scenes around Kamala Harris's historic nature. The first woman really to be in the executive office of the White House, right? And many have tried before. Hillary Clinton, of course, almost broke the glass ceiling, and in many ways had chipped away so as to allow a Kamala Harris, for example, to ascend really to, a heartbeat away from the presidency. And of course, a lot of speculation about Joe Biden's age. He will be 78 on the 20th of November. So, if I'm the first, happy birthday, Mr. President-elect, just a few weeks away from now. But she will be the last person in the room with Biden, just as he was with Barack Obama, right? So there is a great deal our focus going to be on her role here because she is in many ways waiting in the wings, if you will. Remember, this is someone that also ran against Biden for the crown, as you put it, for the top job and fell short. And of course, received a nod from Biden due to him recognizing the role that black women in particular, that black demographic in particular, has played in democratic successes in the United States. So very, very significant. I think, maybe Professor Krista Johnson can jump in here as well, because she teaches at the university where Kamala Harris graduated in I believe it was the 1980s.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Yes,
Dr.
sorry.
Johnson. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yes. No. Sherman's absolutely right. This is historic. Everyone is very excited about Kamala Harris being the vice president-elect. This is historic, and it's going to be interesting to see how things evolve. As Sherwin said, Black women need to be given a lot of credit for this entire Biden win. We see states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, but we move into Georgia, and the ground game there by people like Stacey Abrams and her organization, Fair Fight, were just phenomenal, right? To turn a red state blue. And I think that you're going to see a real deep appreciation for Black women. I think you'll see quite a number of representation in among his cabinet and certainly senior leadership there, and rightfully so. I also think it's interesting. I think, Vice President or President-elect Biden has been vice president. And when he was vice president for Obama really relied on him in a number of fronts. He was a very loyal vice president to Obama, especially in public, but I think was very frank and honest and direct with him in private. I think you're going to see the expectation that he's going to want that from Vice President Kamala Harris. She's going to be given, I'm sure, very important policy tasks and issues to address, just as as Biden was in an Obama administration. And I think that that's going to, bode well for Kamala Harris, because in essence, given the age of Joe Biden, she the expectation and the anticipation is that she will become the new face of the Democratic Party in a few years' time.
Johnson, just before I let my colleague Kate Fisher go, because Kate, you there in Washington, what's word on the ground on when we're expected to hear from the president-elect as well as the vice president-elect?
Well, I can tell you what the sound on the ground is. I'm inside a studio here in Washington, and I don't know if you can hear, but I can hear the cars honking from where I am inside this soundproof studio. There is a huge amount of jubilation on the streets of Washington, D.C. That is, of course, because this city is very much a democratic city. So it almost feels as though their football team just won the World Cup. There are hundreds of people out on the streets, whooping, shouting, and the cars are honking their horns. As for the president himself, he's not actually at the White House at the moment, we don't think, because he went to play golf this morning. So we think that is where he learned of his fate. He's released a statement, his team have released a statement saying that they believe that this Biden's win is false, without giving any evidence as to why that would be. We don't yet know if and when we are going to hear from him in person. And obviously that is a crucial question because it really depends how he's going to deal with this moment in public will help to shape the way the country deals with it, because obviously he has a lot of supporters. Some of them have not always acted. He has sometimes incited violence, and we do not, obviously that does not want to happen. So the question now is whether he will bow down gracefully and make sure that there is calm restored should there be any thought of anything untoward happening. At the moment, the atmosphere, certainly in Washington, is extreme happiness and jubilation.
Atmosphere, I'd say, from the scenes and sounds of things. Thanks a lot, Kate Fisher, my colleague who's in Washington, D.C. Let me bring in Professor Somadoda Fiyeni now to hear. We'll bring him on to talk about what Africa's reaction should be. So we do have him now. Professor Fiyeni, okay, we'll see if we do have him in just a moment. Let's come back to you, Dr. Johnson. We spoke about Africa, and obviously a very strategic partner for the United States if we're talking about democratization, especially if we're talking about developing nations and just general progress, especially in the global order. What would and should be Joe Biden's priorities, and which countries should he be looking to strengthen ties with first?
Well, I think that it'll be interesting to see, one of the challenges that the Trump administration had is that so many of our ambassadorships went vacant for so long, and especially on the African continent. And then you had, ambassadorships and people in senior leadership position that I don't think were really moving our agenda forward. So I'm hopeful that, probably not in November, but certainly after that, we're going to start seeing some of these ambassadorships filled. And that's going to be key in terms of giving us an understanding of, the direction that the Biden administration is looking to move in. Obviously, we're already, I think that there does need to be a lot done with regards to trade and investment. It'll be interesting to see how a Biden administration deals with a post-AGOA era, if they're going to go along the lines of what kinds of trade agreements they're interested in negotiating here. We can remember with the Obama administration, their big platform, I guess, for Africa was the Power Africa initiative, which then kind of dwindled, and we really haven't heard very much of that. Certainly not with the Trump administration, who's now gone with this Prosper Africa. I think you're going to see a lot more encouragement of trade and investment on the African continent, especially the major, players, South Africa, certainly Nigeria, Kenya. There seems to be some interest there. It'll be interesting, and I'm sure Africans are going to be interested to see what our response is with regards to the war on terror and just the issue of countering violent extremism and the role of Islam. And certainly under the Obama administration, I think many African analysts and specialists would argue that the Obama administration really had a policy of the U.S. versus Islam on the African continent. And I think African policymakers and political leaders will have a role to play, I think, in really encouraging the United States to take a different tack with regards to countering violent extremism, the threat of terror, etc., on the African continent.
Interesting that you talk about the Obama administration and its direction. I see that about 2 minutes ago, the former president, this is what he had to say in expressing confidence in his vice president, Joe Biden. And of course, if you've just joined us, you would have seen the headlines. He has been pronounced president-elect, the 46th of the United States. Barack Obama saying that, I know he'll do the job with the best interests of every American at heart, whether or not he had their vote, which is a very interesting thing, Dr. Johnson, to talk about, because, those who are saying, what is Joe Biden going to do? Does he enjoy a popular mandate, or does he get the mandate he gets, or the mandate that he takes? And what would that be for him, do you think, under what possibly would be hostility in some quarters?
Yes, well, I think it's interesting. I think when all is said and done, we're going to see a different coalition that brought President-elect Biden to the White House than what brought President Obama to the White House. And I think it's going to be a broader coalition. So I think that he is going to certainly have a mandate, through the Electoral College and certainly through his popular vote, but also in terms of the broad coalition that he has managed to assemble. And I think, though, what everybody is now trying to ascertain is how much is he going to emphasize the need for unity and trying to kind of, not rock the boat and not, alienate the Trump supporters, and then the extent to which he's going to listen to, I guess, maybe the more left-leaning constituencies of his base. And both of those are really going to be very critical, right? Because the people that you see out on the streets now are, of course, his supporters, and they're expecting change. But some of that can really also happen and needs to happen at a systemic level, right? Because we had certainly a lot of the vitriol emanating from the White House over the past 4 years, but there were so many enablers, and what was so apparent in our democracy, right, that our institutions, the democratic norms, are not sufficient to protect and to sustain our democracy, and that sometimes what you're going to need is actually legislation with regards to this. So I think, and I'm hopeful that you're going to see, I think, some fundamental, kind of changes and restructuring throughout various levels and systems of government. And I think that there should be a broad mandate and expectation that those changes need to happen.
Dr. Krista Johnson, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and insights. She's Associate Professor and Director of the Center for African Studies at Howard University in Washington, D.C. She's also a political scientist whose work has focused largely on African politics and health politics in Africa and the diaspora. Just to update you on what we're talking about, Joe Biden has been pronounced, according to projections of U.S. news agencies, as the president-elect, the 46th by 279 of those electoral votes, according to those projections, 214 for Donald Trump. At Senate, we're looking for 48 plus 1 seat for the Senate seats for the Democrats, 41 minus 1 for the Republicans, and the House itself, the Democrats sitting at 215, 195 for the Republicans. So let's just take a sneak preview of what Joe Biden has said in the past about South Africa, about the apartheid regime, and obviously that should give you a sense of the kind of issues that he stands firm on.
What disturbs me more than the policy that you call a policy is the rationale for the policy. The rationale for the policy. You set out 4 principles that you adhere to, and then and I will go over them in a moment. Then you say on page 14, we must not become part of South Africa's problem. We must remain part of their solution. We must not aim to impose ourselves, our solutions, our favorites in South Africa. Damn it, we have favorites in South Africa. The favorites in South Africa are the people who are being repressed by that ugly white regime. We have favorites. Our loyalty is not to South Africa, it's to South Africans. And the South Africans are majority black, and they are being excoriated. It is not to some stupid puppet government over there. It is not to the Afrikaner regime. We have no loyalty to them. We have no loyalty to South Africa, to South Africans. And the fact of the matter is I listen to this rationale, first of all. It is the leaders of South Africa and their people, black and white, who have the majority responsibility. They must rise to it. Well, they are rising to it. They're rising to it. The only thing left available to them with that repulsive, repugnant regime of Afrikaners there. And it's the only way they have. They've tried everything for the last 20 years. They begged, they borrowed, they crawled. And now they're taking up arms. The second thing, progress toward peace requires a timetable. Timetable, elimination of apartheid. What's our timetable? What are we saying to that repugnant regime? These people are being crushed. And we're sitting here with the same kind of rhetoric. The same thing we heard.
Senator, let me say that I hate to hear a senator of the United States calling for violence.
I'm not calling
That's
for violence.
what you're doing.
I hate to hear
exactly what you're doing.
I hate to hear an administration and a Secretary of State refusing to act on a morally abhorrent point.
So that's the man that's being pronounced as America's president-elect, according to projections in the United States. Congratulatory messages keep coming in from various quarters. We told you former President Barack Obama saying that he has faith in his former Vice President Jeb Bush, tweeting congratulations to Biden, saying watch out for a bunch of these from Republicans as the days go by. And of course, the congratulations are not just for him alone. In Oakland, in California, where the Vice President-elect Kamala Harris was born, the mayor, Libby Schaefer, there was in tears. Let's bring in our political analyst, Professor Somadoda to see who will be overjoyed with these developments, especially in the African continent, and why. Professor Figeni, first of all, your reaction. Did you see this coming, especially given the fact that it's been a tense week almost? Every day people thought that the elections were going to be announced, that they thought it was going to be that easy, but it became slower and slower, that counting. But till we had that announcement, Pennsylvania tipping it in favor of Joe Biden, putting him over 270, and Nevada adding a couple of more to 273, more than what he needed to get to the White House.
Well, I did expect the outcome. That is why in some of the media outlets on Friday, I called that even though Joe Biden was still behind in some of the battleground states like Georgia and Pennsylvania, that he was still going to overtake if you follow the trend of mail-in ballots, as well as the fact that the most populous areas like Atlanta, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, mainly tend to come up late, and they tend to boost the numbers and narrow the lead. So I had Joe Biden. Yes, it was a very close, highly competitive, highly divisive election where both sides seem to have managed to mobilize their base.
And as you can see, the visuals that we're playing there in the background, the American people are out on the streets, a mixed crowd, obviously looking at, talking about the demographics of each county and state will be a different thing, but they seem to be presenting a united front, which is what Joe Biden himself was calling for. Will he be able to at least unite the world order at the level of multilateralism, which is why what I was asking, why is this important for us? We know that there has been ambivalence for the causes that Africa as a bloc was fighting for at the United Nations on some level.
Well, I do think that it is important for Africa on many levels. One, for Donald Trump, he seemed to have been generally indifferent to Africa. It simply didn't matter. But also, his own style of presidency was the one of a transactional leadership where he dealt with each country, got concessions from each country, whereas Africa is stronger when they do have the African Union or they come as a bloc to actually try to bargain for certain deals, whether it's trade deals, investments, and so forth. But it is also important for South Africa in a sense because Joe Biden, having been one of the people who expressed solidarity and having been involved in the anti-apartheid student, activism, he will at least have some emotional attachment and memory of that. Remember and contrast that with Donald Trump. He didn't even bother to appoint an ambassador for South Africa for quite a long time. That's how lowly ranked South Africa was.
Professor Somadoda Figeni, do stay with us. Let's speak now to the ANC's national spokesperson, Pule Mabe, to get some reaction from the governing party. A very good evening to you, Mr. Mabe, and thank you so much for speaking to us. I recall at some point you and I had a conversation about the party's reaction to President Donald Trump's then comments about former President Nelson Mandela, how he viewed him as a terrorist, how he's besmirched his record as a liberation struggle leader. How do you feel now that it seems the tide has turned in the United States and there is a president-elect who is not a Republican, who is not Donald Trump?
Well, evening, Ostepiso, and evening to your viewers. Of course, we do welcome the outcomes of the U.S. presidential race. When we spoke to the SABC earlier this week, we did say that we must allow the people of the United States to express their views and wishes. So the outcomes of these elections are a reflection of what the people of the United States really wanted. And all of us must embrace that. It shows that they wanted a certain change. They also want the country to take a particular direction. So this is the outcome of democracy. And all of us, regardless of how aggrieved we might want to feel about the outcomes, including those that might have supported a different view in that particular country, that they all rise to embrace the president-elect and make sure that they join the world in charting a way forward and beginning to deal with the crisis that we are now faced with. I think nations of the world need to unite behind ensuring that we find a solution on this global pandemic that has engulfed almost all nations of the world.
And I want to talk precisely about that. I mean, the United States and South Africa have enjoyed fairly cordial diplomatic relations, especially during the pandemic. We've seen the United States make donations, including that of ventilators, to South Africa. But there's also been criticism at a global level of the attitude of the U.S. president, especially in what has been called the race for their vaccine, hoarding of vaccines that are going through trials, saying that every American will have access to that. How would that have been possible if it did not mean denying the poorest of countries an opportunity to be able to buy vaccines? So the question still comes down to, do you think that this change is an important policy change for diplomatic relations between the U.S. and South Africa, that Joe Biden is now the president-elect?
Well, it does bring a complete new feel to the scenario. We also remember that before Trump took over, it was always it was a president from the Democrats in the form of Barack Obama. So we are hoping that this will also serve to consolidate those diplomatic ties between our country and the U.S. But of course, we are hoping, and given the statement that the president-elect has himself made during his campaign, and even as recent as today, to make sure that we all focus our energies towards finding a solution. It is important that nations of the world are united, and the statement that the president-elect has made in the U.S. suggests that that kind of spirit of consolidating unity would ultimately prevail. We need to understand that there is no way that one country alone would be responsible for finding a solution to the pandemic. It requires that nations of the world work together towards that. And what Joe Biden begins to do is that in his own articulations, he has expressed the need for us to work together to make sure that we search on as one in finding a solution to the pandemic. And we're quite, it's a great relief that we are all moving towards that direction. But as it relates to the outcomes, of course, and I like the point that we've always made as the African National Congress, But it is an expression of the will of the people of the United States, which all of us must respect and welcome.
Thank you very much, Pule Mabe, spokesperson for the governing party in South Africa, the African National Congress. Political analyst Professor Somadoda is still with us. Perhaps let's outline then for those watching, Professor Figeni, what the tone has been under the Trump administration. As you mentioned, there was an ambivalence. If you look at some of the projects that had been successful under the Obama administration, PEPFAR, for instance, they continued under President Donald Trump, but yet at a very limited scale. There was a point when he obviously insulted African countries and their leaders by referring to Africa as a-hole countries. That level of crass commentary about a very important diplomatic relations may be a thing of the past, but it's also about the posture. Some commentators have said American policy towards Africa remains American policy, so don't expect too much change.
The tone is very important and some degree of civility, but also the approach. Remember that Donald Trump became the central focal point. America has its own national interest, some of them global imperial interest. That one is a fact. Whichever president comes to play, they have to contend with that reality. But the style, the tone, the preference, and the approach is very important. And it is for that reason I was saying that Donald Trump had personalized most of these relationships. If he had strong relationship with Israel, he would go all the way and pronounce Jerusalem as a new capital. And also he seemed not to be comfortable with the multilateral arrangements, like the World Health Organization, where he was saying he's pulling off, UNESCO he pulled off, and from many other international programs, climate change and so forth. So many programs, of course, would continue, like the ones of the Young African Leadership Initiative of Obama. But there was no new initiative that we had seen. There was no big drive. Most of the programs that continued are your traditional programs driven by different NGOs or state-supported entities like USAID. But at the very top, there was no appetite, no enthusiasm.
Right. Let's get reaction now from the economic freedom fighters. We're joined now by Godrich Gadi. A very good evening to you, Mr. Gadi, and thank you so much for speaking to us. And you're obviously tasked with the African relations within the party. This is along the line that we're talking about multilateralism, international relations with the United States. You yourself have been very clear about Donald Trump as a candidate in these elections. But I want to pick up on what Professor Figeni was saying, that we may see a different type of approach when we talk about U.S. internationalism. But I'm curious about foreign interests, how Donald Trump has said to pretty much inveigle his agenda with regards to diplomatic relations of the United States vis-a-vis what the foreign policy should be. He spoke about Israel. Canada has congratulated him, but his interests there have said to be worrisome. China, etc., etc. What are your thoughts?
Well, good evening, my sister, and to your viewers. The Economic Freedom Fighters takes note of the election outcomes of the United States. What we know about the United States of America is that it's a unique electoral system where there are only two political parties. Whichever wins the elections, that party. The policies of the United States government never change. Presidents come, presidents go, and we've got nothing to say about the American elections outcome because there's nothing that is going to change. The same approach of the United States government under any other president on the Israel-Palestine conflict, on the expansion of America's military bases across the world and in Africa, particularly the destabilization of governments they do not agree with, as it happens in Somalia, Libya, Iran, Iraq, and now Venezuela. The bully conduct of the United States of America and the United Nations and Security Council will continue unabated.
And
well, as for President...
Go ahead.
As for President Joe Biden, well, we can only advise him to stay clear of such controversies of his predecessors. And as an urgent task, he should restore diplomatic and economic relations with countries like Cuba, Zimbabwe, Iran, and Venezuela.
I want you to stay with us, Mr. Gadi, because I'd like to get Professor Figeni to respond to this. Interesting point that Mr. Gadi makes, because there are those who've said, if you look at the tenuous relationship between the U.S. and China, some have said it wasn't necessarily because of disagreement on trade, but it was, some say, because China was trying to influence Donald Trump. There was some influence spending on both sides, and that was the reason behind the tenuous relationships and what has unraveled. What are your thoughts on this? What Mr. Gadi is saying, that this isn't going to be a change of policy?
Well, I do think that the primary factor for the U.S. in all its security documents is for the U.S. primacy as the key player and the dominant player in the world. So when it begins to see China inching forward to become the largest economy and also overtaking America in some of the technological advances, such as the 5G, that's when you have America reacting, irrespective of whether it's Trump or Joe Biden. But the key issue there is Trump tended to be unpredictable, sometimes unilateralist in approach, and therefore that's where the danger was. It took a tweet for Trump to conduct his policies or at times to react to certain things. It's a matter of predictability that was actually needed.
Very briefly, Mr. Gadi, so if you were then to sit with Joe Biden and say there needs to be a change of direction, what would you say it should be? Mr. Gadi, are you still on the line with us?
I beg your pardon, I lost that question.
So I was asking, so then if you said nothing's going to change, but if you had an opportunity to speak to the President-elect Joe Biden, what would you seek should change?
The foreign policy of the United States government as it relates to Cuba actually needs to change. Their foreign policy as it relates to the Israeli-Palestine conflict actually needs to change. And their policy on their expansionist policy on military bases across the world and Africa in particular. We cannot be in Africa and we'll be having military bases of an imperialist country like the United States of America.
Thank you very much.
If only we can have such a government in the United States.
Economic freedom fighters Godrich Gadi. More reaction from South Africa on the announcement that Joe Biden is the U.S. president-elect in the United States. That's following results from Pennsylvania and Nevada now, putting him at 273 of those electoral votes. Mkulega Hlengwa is with the Inkatha Freedom Party. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Mr. Hlengwa. What is the IFP's reaction to the news? Is it welcome news?
Well, thank you, Aspedeson. Good evening to you and the viewers. We would like to congratulate President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. Of course, is of great significance, historic importance, and a political game changer in American and international politics. And we wish them both well on the roadmap that they have set out for the United States, which of course will undoubtedly have a ripple effect on international politics and on Africa generally and specifically. And of course the fact that it coincides with South Africa chairing the African Union is an opportune moment for this transition to actually have a keen focus on the responsibilities of the United States insofar as international relations and protocols is concerned. Insofar as the elections are a factor, we hope that the dog whistling we've seen and the threats of violence and tension which have characterized post-election day in recent days will be quelled down, and we call for calm, and that the standards which the United States has held other countries
Your line is breaking a bit, but I'd like to just get a sense from you, or what do you think of President Trump's continual statements that he still believes that he has won, he believes that he's been robbed, and most importantly, he will continue to challenge the outcome of the results. Mr. Hlengwa, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Yes.
I think I just lost it, so I don't know what happened.
Okay, I'm still here. I was asking what the IFP's reaction is to the statements by President Donald Trump that he will continue to mount a legal challenge against the outcome of the results.
Well, looking at American law, that's well within his rights. He will have to approve the case. But what is important here is that whatever dissatisfaction he may have must not actually spill over into violence and tension. Violence anywhere in the world is violence which has got a negative effect for the international economic trajectory. And we're calling on President Trump to be responsible in how he approaches this matter for the sake of everybody involved. And as we are saying that the standards of peace which the United States has held others to should continue to characterize the American political landscape at this point in time, and for responsible leadership to actually prevail. It's quite clear, though, of course, that the issues around elections continue to be of concern, whether it's in the U.S. or whether it's in elections in Tanzania, as we've seen over the recent days. And so there is a need for the international community to relook at the election model so that we deal with the issues which continue to characterize the dissatisfaction of those who may be contesting elections. But as things stand now, let's not lose sight of the historical importance of these elections in the United States, as we believe they press a reset button insofar as international relations is concerned, following 4 years which have been of great concern and anchored in politics which has been inconsistent really with cooperation and human rights and the respect for human life, and of course the racism which has become a feature of the American landscape has not been something we must take lightly to. Of course, the Republican Party itself will have to do some soul searching and press the reset button itself insofar how it became, anchored in the kind of politics which Donald Trump.
And I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much to Nkulega Hlengwa of the IFP, and thank you very much to you, Professor Somadoda, Figeni, political analyst. And if you saw me with my head bowed there for a minute, it was because I was trying to see what the latest results are. As you can see, live visuals there of Americans on the streets of America celebrating the news that Joe Biden is a president-elect of the United States. So Georgia, with 16 electoral college votes, 99% of the votes in, that's the estimation. Joe Biden sitting at 49.5%, Donald Trump at 49.3%. So that's also been a very strategic state that has been watched. That's how we come to the end of the Full View. Thank you so much for joining us.